Steve Jobs and religion. A little background about Steve Jobs. He was born in San Francisco in 1955. He was baptized and instructed in the Christian faith. He even went through confirmation class and was confirmed in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. However, while growing up, he embraced Bob Dylan and the Beatles, which influenced Jobs and his political leanings, his anti-establishment views, and contributed to Jobs' supposed psychedelic drug use. The Beatles so influenced Jobs that he was repeatedly sued by the Beatles' Apple Corps for using the name Apple. Also, Jobs took a spiritual discovery trip to India, just like the Beatles did. This spiritual discovery trip led Jobs' conversion to Buddhism. In fact, a Buddhist monk actually presided over Steve Jobs' wedding. Jobs adapted the idea that Buddhist scripture, like many of Apple's business dealings and Jobs' own personal struggles, all similarly held the concept of being transmitted in secret. In a writing by Russell W. Belk and Gulnar Tumbot, the authors came up with the idea that Jobs created a cult with the creation of Apple. They believe a brand such as Apple becomes a religion to its true believers. If you look at this idea, it's not too far off, in my opinion. True Apple users and fans loathe PCs and Microsoft products and can't wait for the next Apple product to emerge. Belk and Tumbot argue that the loyalty of Apple's users mimics that of a devout religious person. Furthermore, Steve Jobs' demanding managerial style could be compared to that of a religious cult leader. Based upon these ideas, then, some might believe that Steve Jobs is a god. Now, that's a god with a small g. Another interesting tie between religion itself, specifically the use of Christian teaching methods, and Apple, exists. In the 1980s, Steve Jobs hired a man by the name of Guy Kawasaki to promote the original Macintosh computer, or Mac, to software developers. Kawasaki attended Billy Graham's evangelical school to develop his evangelical skills. By attending Graham's school, Mr. Kawasaki came up with the idea of corporate evangelizing and employed this technique to convince software developers to create Macintosh products. After Steve Jobs' passing in 2011, CNN Money Online gave a tribute to Jobs that made him sound as if he were a saint in an article titled 10 Ways Steve Jobs Changed the World. In conclusion, while it's clear that Steve Jobs embraced Buddhism and its teachings later in his life, we should be reminded of a quote by the now deceased Reverend Dr. Martin Tadley, whom, interestingly enough, was Steve Jobs' own pastor during Jobs' youth. And I quote, "Unless you have been with a person in their last days, you have no idea what goes on in a person's heart and mind in the closing days and moments of their life." Hopefully, Jobs decided to return to Christianity during his last moments on earth. Thank you for your time.